is with today's class, we're davening for a refuah shalema for Baruch Shalom Doivber ben Miriam Bluma, that he should have a refuah shalema nisi. And of course, we're also davening for Henya Rivka Bas Bracha Devar Leah and Rav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya. Today is a big day. It's a Shevat, and we don't have to explain what kind of month that is for us in Shvat. And so we're doing the Sicha on Yud Shvat today. And it's an interesting thing because I feel like for the most part, we've been doing Sichas that are more lamdish, more haskaladik, either Rashi Sichas or other Sichas that analyze parts of Torah. And this Sicha is very avodadik and a very, very yisaidistic Sicha, very, very important, and a Sicha that gives us very basic ideas in our avodah as Hasidim. And there is a part of it that does not seem to relate to us so directly, but I think that that's just at first blush because everybody knows that everything relates to us. Saf kol saf, it all boils down to the woman, I think. Aleph, Sif Aleph. Teichne shel yom hayilula b'stalkos l'tzadik asher boi olim kol masa v'terase b'avadase asher avad kol yemei chayav. So the content and the energy of a yom hayilula, the day that marks the leaf taking of a tzaddik from this world to the higher world, and what happens on that day. The Alter Rebbe teaches us in Tanya that on that day, all of his accomplishments and all of the Torah and all of his avodah that he worked on his whole life is in sharp relief, rises, comes to crescendo, however you want to describe it. And so, why is this important to us? So the Rebbe says, "Hu b'negei lanu beikar ha'izbaininus b'masa v'teirasei b'avedasei shel bal hayilula." So the fact that this is what happens for the Bal Hayilula is one thing, but regarding us and in the main, what are we supposed to take from this? We're supposed to contemplate and we're supposed to look deeply in the actions, in the accomplishments, in the Torah, and in the Avodah, in the spiritual works, Shel Bal Hayilula, of the Bal Hayilula. In this case, we're talking, of course, about the Frierdiker Rebbe. And we do this al menas lilmod mizes hayra b'chaye hayom yom avor kol echad mehaholchim bikvaisav b'masav teirasav b'avadasa shel adam. We need to learn and we need to deeply contemplate and ruminate because we need to learn practical lessons in our everyday life for each one of us who go in his footsteps and want to go in the path of his accomplishments and in his Torah and his Avodah. The kivon sheitzel kol echad miYisrael rabim heim ha'inyanim hanechlolim b'masa b'teirasei b'avedasei she'avad kol yemei chayav. V'alachas kama v'kama eitzel nasi b'Yisrael. So the Rebbe says that because in general, for every Jew, there are so many things that this Jew does, there's so many things that this Jew accomplishes and learns and his Avodah. And how much more so, Alachas Kama V'Kama, when you're talking about a Nasi b'Yisrael, you're talking about somebody like the Frierdiker Rebbe, there's so many things to learn from. Lefichach leitim ein bar v'goli mahi hanakuda ha'ikris shebavedasei. Therefore, oftentimes, it's not clear and it's not revealed exactly which point, what is the main point that we should be concentrating on. Asher mimena yesh lilmod hayra ikris. What is the main point from which we have to take into our lives the main lesson? The Rebbe says sometimes it's a problem. However, amnam benidun didan, but in this case, the Rebbe says yom istalkos shel chek marichami admor. But on the day of the stalkos of my father-in-law, the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, yesh biyadeinu hayra brura. We don't have this worry. We don't have this concern. We have a very, very clear lesson. Why? Because Teirasai gam milashon hayra. Torah, of course, is milashon hayra. It's always about a lesson. And when you look at the Torah shel Bal Hayilula, when you look at the Torah that the Frierdiker Rebbe taught, and you look specifically at the Maimer Dibra Maschel Basi Lagani, Shechoik Mari Chami Admar Bali Yulula Ba'atzmai Haitzi Larabim Liyayim Histal Kusay. So the Frierdiker Rebbe by himself readied this Maimer, and it was released, and nothing, of course, is by chance, for his Yom HaYelula. So he himself prepared this. So then, Umiterezu Yoidim Anu Bamet Yuchim Liyois Baininus Ha'ikris B'Yom HaYelula Shaloi. So if we look at the Maimer, it's very clear and it's obvious what we need to contemplate in the main on the Yom HaYelula of Frierdiker Rebbe. Umahu ha'inyan sheyesh lilmad mikach b'avodas adam b'poel. And what is the inyan that we have to learn, practically speaking, in our own avodah? Base. So basically, the Rebbe is saying there's no confusion here. The Frierdiker Rebbe made it very, very clear what we have to take from his life, especially as the Yom HaYelula approaches. Base. B'siyum ha'maimer, at the end of the maimer, mevarchik merichami admor as goydel unechitzos inyan hazrizus ba'avodas Hashem bekiyum haTorah v'hamitzvos. At the end of the maimer, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains the enormity and the absolute imperative of serving Hashem, doing Torah and mitzvahs with alacrity, doing it quickly with zrizus. Ki mihu hayadea ita yizmanoi, because nobody knows when the end of their life might come. Ukadiisa b'medrash, like it says in Medrash, ein loymar hamtinu li ad she'eseh cheshbon asai b'ad she'atzava levesi. The Medrash says, you can't say, wait for me. In other words, that's not how life works. Wait for me until I will put all of my affairs in order and I will tell my relatives what I want done after my life. That's not how life works. So when we're talking about this, what comes out of these words that we just cited is that alacrity, that swiftness, that doing things quickly in Avodas Hashem is not just a detail. Like we learn simply from the teaching in the Mechilta, and Rashi brings this down, Ein machmitzin es hamatzos. So we have this rule that you can't let matzah lie, right? It all has to be done very, very quickly. Everything about matzah has to be done very, very quickly, because if you let it, if you're not constantly pummeling the dough and you don't put it into the oven very, very quickly, it can rise and it can become chametz. So that's the pshat that we emerge from. This is something that has to be imported from the halachos regarding matzahs to all of Avodas Hashem. Asher bil adav Allah adam lahafsid es hakol. Just like with matzah, if you don't go through the process very quickly, and you don't get the matzah into the oven immediately, it could chalila rise and become chametz. In the same way, if you don't do mitzvahs with the necessary swiftness, then you could also lose everything. Vayra ein adam shalit leimar, and a person is not in control, and he can't say when he's going to pass and when he's going to become incapacitated and won't be able to do certain things. And this idea that a person is not in control, is not sovereign over his time and how long you have in this world, amur legabi kol yoim v'rega b'chol meshav yimei chayav alei adamis. This relates to every single day and every single moment in time for the entire time that we live on this earth. Me'av esrim shana, it should be 120 years. V'yeser al kain, and more than this, nirmaz b'lashon maimer chazal hanal, alluded to in the Maimer Chazal that was cited above, Ein machmitzin es hamatzos. So we're taught Ein machmitzin es hamitzvos, that just like you shouldn't let the matzah just lie there and rise, so too you should not allow a mitzvah to just kind of loll around and not be taken care of. Im bas mitzvah liyatcha aseh samiyat. if a mitzvah comes to your hands, meaning if it comes to your attention or it comes to your possibility, it becomes something you can take care of it immediately. Hainu, shebetchias kiyam mitzvah, hine tmuras ininu shmartem es hamitzvos nase chametz hefech hamitzvah. The Rebbe says that just like with matzos, it says a shmartem es hamatzos, that you have to be very, very attentive. You have to watch over this very, very carefully. It has to be done very, very quickly, has to be done very efficiently, and it has to get into the oven immediately. The same, and if not, it becomes chametz. The same thing with a mitzvah. You have to be very attentive to it. You have to watch over it carefully. You have to do it quickly, because otherwise it could become chametz. It could become chalila, the opposite of a mitzvah. Ubetchilas hamaymer. And so this was at the end of the mimer. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, act with alacrity now, right now. Like the Rebbe used to write many, many times, used to answer people, they need to do something, and the Rebbe would write mahir, urgent, immediately, and underscore with 2 lines. So that's at the end of the mimer. And at the beginning of the mimer, mevar bemet tzricha liyos ha'avoda. Beginning of the mimer, Frierdiker Rebbe tells us, okay, and what is the avoda that I want you to engage in that needs to be done with such alacrity? Hainu, be'eze inyan nidreshes hazrizos. Exactly in which inyan do we have to bring the zrizos to bear? Bekiyum inyan, what is it? In bringing to fulfillment nisava kadosh baruch hu liyos lo yisbarach dir b'tachteinim. That the Eibishter had an overwhelming desire that there should be for him a dwelling place in this lower or lowly world. Okay, so that is generally the avodah, and the Frierdiker Rebbe leads with that. That's the avodah that the Eibishter wants from us. And at the end of the mimer, he tells us that it has to be done quickly. Now, the Rebbe is going to, in this part of the Sikha, this is the Haskalah part, the Rebbe is going to explain this idea of Nis'ava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyos Lo Yisbarach Dir B'Tachteinim. What does this mean? Gimel. Afal pi she'al yidei kol pu'ula shel ish Yisrael b'kiyum ha'torah mitzvahs v'al derech zeh binyanenu kol ma'asecha yilu shem shemayim binyane kol ma'asecha yilu shem shemayim b'chol drachach ha'eu nasis lir lo yisbarach b'tachteinim u'miskayim inin nesava kadosh baruch hu. So although in every overture that a Jew does, in anything connected with Torah mitzvahs, and not just like the Taryag mitzvahs, but also in anything that we do that is a pedestrian act, but we do it l'shem shemayim. So we eat l'shem shemayim, we sleep l'shem shemayim, we shop l'shem shemayim, and also we do it in a way that is suffused with the knowledge of Hashem. B'chol derech ha'ehu. So the Rebbe says, even though in all of these aspects of our life, the Dir Lo Yisbarach is created, it all is part of this project. Mikol Makayim, nevertheless, move on. It's understood. So the Rebbe says, but nevertheless, it's understood that what we have to focus on the Yom HaYelula, and in the days approaching the Yom HaYelula, so right now we're only inclusive of today, 10 days from the Yom HaYelula, and inclusive of the Yom HaYelula. So we have to focus on something specific. Of course, we have to act with alacrity, generally speaking, in all the Torah and all the mitzvahs, which is part of this project. But the Rebbe says that as we come to the Yom HaYelula, there's some specific lesson that we have to take to heart, that we have to focus on. We have to contemplate in which inyan do we need to put extra focus and the main focus on now in these days. And it has to be ubehetem, it has to be in conformity lemasa v'teirasei v'avedasei de Baal HaYelula, to the accomplishment and the Torah and the avodah of the Baal HaYelula. V'yuvan behektim habir b'dir kalashon shehevi chayk marichami admar b'mamari nis'ava kadosh baruch hu liyas lo yizbarach dir b'tachtonim. So before we get to the practical aspect of what it is in the overarching idea of Dir Lo Yisbarach, what it is that has to be focused on now, specifically, first the Rebbe says we have to understand and we have to be medayik. We have to parse the specific terminology that the Friedrich Rebbe brought in his Maimer that to us has now become, we just take it for granted. But the Friedrich Rebbe wrote specific words, Nis'ava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyas Lo Yisbarach Dir B'tachtonim. The Be'inyan Nis'ava, the Rebbe says in the idea that the Eibishter had a desire, Yeshnam Gimel Pratim. We have to understand specifically 3 subsidiary ideas in this desire that the Eibishter had. Aleph, Lo Yizbarach, that it should be for him, for the blessed Eibishter. Beis, it should be a dira, and Gimel B'tachtonim, in this lower realm. Aleph. Lo Yisbarach. What do these words imply? Hadirahi Latz Musa Yisbarach. Lo Yisbarach implies that this dwelling place has to be for the atzmus of the Eibishter, the Lo Rak the Madregas the Iris Begiluyim. And this dira is not just going to be a place where the lights of God, the revealed energies, are going to be showcased, but rather this dwelling place is going to be for the atzmos, for the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Aleph. Beis, dira. What does the word dira imply? He matzai shel atzmusa yisbarach lemata eina ba'ofen shel harai. That Hashem's atzmos being found here lemata is not in a transitory state. Ela ba'ofen shel dira b'kfios. But the word dira, dwelling place, implies something that is constant, something that is established in a constant way. And gimel b'tachtoinim, hadira latzmusahi b'tachtoinim dafka. It implies that this constant, well-established abode for the essence of Hashem is going to be in this lowly realm, v'loi ba'olam ha'elyonim, and not in the higher celestial realms. The gimel inyanim elu tluyim zeh bazeh, and these 3 subsidiary aspects are interdependent. Mitzad bechinas hagiluyim, afilu hagiluyim hachi na'alim. If you're speaking about revealed aspects of Hashem, iris, lights that are revealed, even the highest level thereof, hine kivan shemitziusam ena matzmusam. But because these lights that are radiated, because these revelations that are revealed are not self-generated, okay? There's nothing that's self-generated except for Hashem. So these great celestial lights included, because they're not mitziosam me'atzmusam is the terminology. They're not a mitzios, they're not an existence that is self-generated, but rather they're contingent on something else. And specifically, they're contingent on God's desire for them to radiate. Lo yitachin behem inyan hadira. Therefore, they cannot fall into the category of dira, and dira implies something constant. Okay, so because these lights depend on Hashem's will for them to radiate forth, they don't have their own existence in and of themselves. Therefore, when you talk about something that is going to be dira, kfiyut, established, they don't fall into the category. Lefi shemitziusam eina mitzius amitis, because they are not really a true existence, mitzad atzmam. Because in and of themselves, they have no existence. They're contingent on the Eibishter wanting them to radiate or not. And kvius can only be a result of something that is not dependent on something else. So, you know what, just to concretize this, think about the fact that when you have a house, so you could be there whenever you want or not, but it's going to be your house. But when you're a guest, you're dependent on somebody else's will or whim or availability or possibility. So the idea of dira is that it's constant and it's not dependent on something else. And the Eires and Giluyim of the Eibishter, as exalted as they might be, are dependent on the Eibishter's Ratzon for them to radiate at any given time or not. And because these celestial lights have specific parameters for their existence, so it's understood that these lights, that these energies can only radiate in a place where there is a specific receptacle for the revelation of the Eibishter. Okay, so now the Rebbe is making a second point. The first point is that they're not an Indian of Kfiyas. The second is that they have specific parameters. And therefore, there needs to be a specific type of keli, a specific type of vessel that can hold that. Masha enkein b'tachtainim, but in contradistinction, when you talk about this physical world, the tachtainim, she'einam kelim lelokus klal, this world is not a fitting receptacle for elokus at all. Efshar kavyachol she'egili elokus. So, but in this world, where there are no possible kelim for gili elokus, not like in Atzilus, not like in Bria, not like in Yitzira, here there's no possibility. So what happens? So on the one hand, it's not a place for Giluyim. On the other hand, Masha Enkein, mitzad bechinas atzmusai. But when you're talking about the essence, when you're talking about atzmus, she'enai begeder helem v'gilui, but about atzmus, you cannot the Indian of atzmos, of essence, you can't apply helem, which means obfuscation, that something should be shrouded and obscured, or gilui, or revelation. Atzmos is atzmos. It supersedes, it transcends these parameters. So it's not like you could talk about atzmos being obscured, or on the other hand, atzmos being revealed. Because atzmos is higher. It's nimna hanimnois. It's something that impossibility is impossible to apply to that thing. It's higher than these differences. Because atzmos is the only thing in the world. Atzmos is the only thing in the world that is a self-generated existence. Everything else in this world, including the highest iris and the highest giluyim, are contingent on something else. I see that a question came in, but I'm just going to finish the paragraph. So because we're talking about atzmos, because we're talking about something that cannot be contained, that transcends any type of limitation or any type of delineation or even any type of description, so bringing down in quotations, bringing down in atzmos, when you're talking negate to atzmos, that is something that could be in a way of dira, of kfiyut, because it's not contingent on anything else or any limitations. I'm going to open up the chat so I could see. don't we sometimes say that something reveals atzmos? And Ms. Khani, I'm sure you're correct. I can't, and I would have to think about this. And I don't have an answer for you right now because it's above my pay grade. I have to speak to people who know Hasidus properly. The only thing that comes to my mind now is that, like the Rebbe is saying, that Atzmus is higher than Helem or Gilui. But maybe sometimes you have to get something out of the way to be able to access that or see that or appreciate that.
So the Atmos was always there the same way, but we are the ones who see it differently.
Yeah. I mean, not that, it's a long sikha, and not that I want to go into any editorializing, but like, I think we're living now in a time of Atzmos rather than Giluyim. So that Atzmos was always there, but we were blinded by the Giluyim or distracted, or that's what we focused on because we're just who we are. And it's not the pshat that Giluyim is not great. Let's not massage that away. It's not the pshat that having the Rebbe smile at you or give you $1 physically, or being able to watch hakafas, or whatever it was. It's not that these things are not great. It's not Chalila that we're saying that the Giluyim of the Eibush are not great. But it's nothing compared to Atzmos. But it's precisely because this world is not a world where there could be the proper kelim for the Giluyim. That's precisely why the Atzmos can sich anhören. It can exist here, and it can be accessed if we're attentive. Because in the higher Eilamais, it's filled with Giluyim. Ubetachtoinim dafka, and this all takes place in this lower realm. Kivan shel Eilamais hel yonim bechinas Giluyim, because the higher realms where there's Giluyim, einam kli latzmusa yizbarech. They are not a vessel for atzmus. Why? Liyosim yerida me'ar panav yizbarech, because they are a place that comes down from the light of Hashem's face, as it were. So this is like what we just said, that it's filled with Giluyim. So Dafka, in this lower realm where there are no Giluyim, Nas is dir latzmusa yizbarach. That's where there could be the emissary abode, the dwelling place for Atzmos. So I'm thinking a little bit more about your question, Chani. I think that if Kishemesh U'Mageh Havaya Elokim, right? So the sun is the sun, is the sun, is the sun. But how we're going to experience the sun is different, exactly like what you said. Dalet. Lefize move on gam b'negei l'avodas ha'adam. So in accordance with this is understood also relevant to our avodah. Shaha'avodah lasas le'yizbarach dir b'tachtonim tzricha le'asais ba'ofen kazeh sheyatim linyana shel dir latzmusa yizbarach hanasis b'tachtonim. So our avodah has to take place. It has to be done in a way that aligns with the three things that we talked about. It's a dira, and it has to be for atzmus lo yizbarach, and it has to be b'tachtonim. And now the Rebbe is going to expound. Aleph, lo yizbarach. What does it mean that the avodah has to be done lo yizbarach? Ha'avodah tzricha lehe'asais rak lo yizbarach. The avodah has to be done just for Hashem. May he be blessed. Hainu, meaning rak l'shem milui ratzain Hashem. The avodah has to be done strictly for the fulfillment of Hashem's desire. Hataiva datzmusa yizbarach, the taiva that Hashem has. V'lo yalmenas l'kabel pras, and not because we want to get a reward, we want to get a prize. Va'af lo l'shem dveikus belokus. And the work should neither be done because we want to attach ourselves to godliness. And should also not be done for the privilege of being able to fulfill Hashem's intention. But rather, the work should be done only so that Hashem's taiva should be fulfilled. So again, just to concretize, I think maybe talking about this in terms of like parenting could be helpful. Like when a child needs something, it's not about the parents jockeying like, oh, I'll do it. I'll wake up with them because they're throwing up all night. The child's needs have to be fulfilled. The child's needs have to be taken care of. It doesn't really matter. It's not about, well, I'll do it. It has to be done. So the Rebbe is saying that lo yisbarach means that the avodah has to be bereft of any ulterior motivations, even the most exalted, like that you want to attach yourself to Hashem, or you want to be the one to fulfill Hashem's intention. No, it has to be in such a way that Hashem's desire is fulfilled. By who? It doesn't matter. Just needs to be done. That's Aleph. And there's the expression of Hasidim that we always wish ourselves that we should eisfir de kavana, that we should be zeicha, that the Rebbe's kavana, the Rebbe's intention should be fulfilled, and that implies that his intention has to be fulfilled. How it's fulfilled, it doesn't have to be me or you or together or another 65 people, just has to be fulfilled. Beis, Dira. What do we learn in our Avodah from Dira? That our Avodah has to be constant. V'hainu, this means, Sha'adam ha'oived oimed ba'oisa ha'toikev b'tmidius kol hazman. It means that the person who's doing this Avodah brings sustained level of devotion and concentration. And it's not something that flip-flops. It's not something that goes up and down. It doesn't fluctuate. Because when the level of devotion or constant effort fluctuates, then you're not talking about something that's dira, that's constant. You're talking about something that's arai, that's transient. So, number one, it has to be for the sake of Hashem's will being fulfilled, not for any other motivation. Number two, it has to be constant level of devotion and bringing all of our keiches to bear. And gimel b'tachtonim, ha'avodah tzricha liyois be'ikar binyanim tachtonim. And this avodah, this constant avodah, that's done for the sake of fulfilling Hashem's taiva, has to be done in the main with inyanim tachtonim. And the Rebbe is going to spend basically most of the sikha explaining this idea of inyanim tachtonim. Hein b'negei l'Torah, v'hein b'negei l'mitzvos, v'al derech zeh b'negei l'Yisrael. So it has to be what will be understood as, quote unquote, the lower dimensions of Torah, the lower dimensions of mitzvahs, and also of Jews. Okay, so we're going to go into this in detail, but right now we could say that the Rebbe is saying it's not necessarily going to be glorious. It's not necessarily going to be the jobs that everybody wants to have because they're high profile and it's very cool to have that on your resume and you're dealing with very important people or very important things. And the Rebbe says that just like the three aspects of Lo Yisbarach, Dir, and Tachtonim, when you understand it about the Eibishter, that these three aspects are interdependent, so too these three aspects in our Avodah, they're also interdependent. Now the Rebbe explains. Kasher avoidasai shel adam hilatzerech mitziusai hu. When a person does avodah, but it's for the purpose of some mitzius. And even if that purpose is because he wants to the davik means like to glue yourself, to help me somebody, to attach himself to elikus, or even on a higher level, he wants to fulfill the will of the creator. But mixed in with his desire to fulfill Hashem's will is the desire for it to be him that fulfills Hashem's will. So in such a situation, when there's an ulterior motivation, even the most exalted kind, it's possible for there to be differentiation in the avodah. Why? It's going to be behetem l'regesh ha'ava v'hadveka sheyeshna b'ay ba'is hashah. Because if it's about wanting to cleave unto God, or it's about him or her wanting to be the one through whom it's accomplished, then it's not going to be consistent, because it's going to depend on the feeling at that particular moment of love for Hashem and the ardor and the passion to cleave onto Hashem. The ein zukfias dira. And so therefore, again, it's not consistent. It's not the idea of dira, which is consistent and constant and always the same. The chain, yesh lechiluk esle ben avodah zula cheres. And there will also be a differentiation in the way in which this person approaches one type of avodah over another. Shebavidasai in yonim tachtainim, einay magish chayus b'tainim kolkach, k'moi ba'avodah b'yonim na'alim. Like, for instance, this person will not feel as passionate or as enthusiastic about taking care of things that are more tachtainim. Like I said, less glorious. They don't seem as important. They don't get so much attention as things that are more exciting to being involved with, or more high profile, or seem to be more important. It's dafka when a person does their avodah just because this is what Hashem wants. Simply to bring to fruition the celestial will. Then every single thing that brings Hashem's will to fruition and to completion is equal before this person. If it means cleaning the toilets, then it means cleaning the toilets. If it means giving a sermon, it means giving a sermon. And therefore, dira. And therefore, once a person is emerging from that point of departure, that it's whatever Hashem needs to get done, then it's going to be constant. It's going to be with devotion. It's the inyan of dira, of a dwelling place. And because the Eibishter wants a dwelling place b'tachtainim, so this person will put their work be'ikar in inyanim tachtainim, in things that seem to be on a so-called lower level. Hey, hanhaga ba'ofen zeh. So our comportment in alignment with these ideas, b'chol gimel hapratim hanal, in these three subsidiary aspects that the Rebbe is parsing for us and expounding upon, lo yizbarech, dira, and tachtainim, ra'inu, these three inyanim, ra'inu, we saw begaloi in a very revealed way, etzel Baal Hayelula Atzmai. We saw it in the work of the Baal Hayelula in the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. Ki yadua, as is well known, ukemedubar kama v'chama pa'amim, and as was spoken about many, many times, Haisa avodas shel Baal Hayelula b'harbatzas haTorah b'chizuk hayadus sharsheret achas v'hemshech echad shel hanhaga b'mesiras nefesh. The avoda of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Bala Yelula, in spreading Torah and in strengthening Judaism was one long, unremitting chain of Mesiras Nefesh. Ukeloshim Bala Yelula b'siyam hamaymer hanal. And as the Frierdiker Rebbe said himself at the end of the Maimer Basi Lagani, Lamaila mitam vadas, it transcended reason and logic. V'ha'avodah de Mesiras Nefesh mora al kach she'ein ha'adam oived avedase b'shvil schar ruchani k'yetz bazeh. And working with Mesiras Nefesh showcases this idea of a person that does not work for any reward, not even a spiritual reward. It's l'shem shleimus mitziosai, and I'm sorry, and he doesn't do it to make himself more evolved, a more complete person. And it's not even for the purpose of cleaving onto Hashem, elarak lo yisbarach, as said above, but it's only because that's what Hashem wants, and Hashem's will has to be fulfilled. And for this person, their personal, themselves doesn't exist. It's a very, very high level of bittul and Mesiras Nefesh. It's not about them at all. Ubefrat, and specifically, and especially if the avodah is done in a way that is reminiscent of the avodah of the Bala Yelula, shehishlich chayav mineged, that he literally he threw away his physical life. He kipshuta. He was ready to die. Avor hafotzas haTorah v'chizuk yados, for spreading Torah and strengthening yados and strengthening Judaism, Yiddishkeit. V'toikev zeh v'oifen zeh shel mesiras nefesh. This kind of strength and tenacity, and this modality of mesiras nefesh, hayu etzloi bitmidius. This was constant. This did not fluctuate. It was constant kol meshach zman nisiyosai, for the entirety of his nisiyos, of his leadership as a Rebbe. Asher ba hiskaimu etzlei kol haifanim de mesiras nefesh. His life included many different aspects and modalities of mesiras nefesh. Ukvar nisbar b'mokem acher baruch, and the Rebbe says, I've already explained in a different place at great length. Hachiluk ben gimel hatkuvos de eser shonim, the difference between the 10, the three subsidiary categories of 10 years within the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nesius. So there was 10 years in Russia, Mesiras Nefesh kipshutai, right? Because the Russian government hounded him. There was 10 years in Poland, and the Rebbe explained that in Poland, vayikane by Echav, just like Yosef HaTzadik, his brothers were jealous of him, so too in Poland, there were a lot of other Torah leaders that were very jealous of the Frierdiker Rebbe and made his life a misery. And the last 10 years were in America, and it was the Mesiras Nefesh of America's Nicht Andesht, that the Rebbe had to take, the Frierdiker Rebbe had to take a land that was barren, spiritually speaking, and a place where people were very, very reticent to show their Yiddishkeit in a public way and completely transform it. So the Rebbe says, "Kfar nizbar b'makom acher barucha achiluk ben gimel hatkufos de eser shonim b'meshech shnois nisiyosei ba'alma day." That the Frierdiker Rebbe had three different kufos, three different time periods. Again, 10 years in Russia, 10 years in Poland, and 10 years in America. Asher b'chol ifane ha'avodah hashonim b'tachlis zeh mizeh ha'yetz lo teikef ha'mesiras nefesh b'shaveh. Irrespective of the fact that the avodah was different in each one of these places, the avodah of Russia was different from the avodah of Poland, the avodah of Poland was different than the avodah of America, but what was equal was the mesiras nefesh. V'hainu. This means, in addition to the fact that Mesiras Nefesh is not something that's transient, but rather something that's constant, Ella b'kfiyus b'li shinuyim, it has to be constant and with no fluctuation. Lihiyasa avoda haba mitzad etzem haneshama, because Mesiras Nefesh comes from the etzem of the neshama, from the yechida of the neshama. Shelemayla me shinuyim, it's higher than changes and fluctuation. And this comes to full expression through revealed Mesiras Nefesh. Shebechol suge havoida hashonim hayes le'toikev haMesiras Nefesh b'shava. And again, the Rebbe says that no matter what form his avodah took, the Mesiras Nefesh was there equally. And although shes askusoi bavodas harbatas hatayra v'chizikayados v'adlafot samayanos hoise b'chol hatchumin, and although we know about the Frierdiker Rebbe that his engagement, his works were in the spreading of Torah and the strengthening of Yiddishkeit and the promulgation of Chassidus, and it was in all different realms and for all different people. Mikol Mokim, nevertheless, Ra'inu etzle hishtadlus yisera, we see that he put extra effort in the following things. So the Rebbe says, although generally speaking, the Frierdiker Rebbe worked to strengthen Torah, to strengthen Yiddishkeit, and to bring Chassidus, to spread it far and wide, but nevertheless, we see special emphasis that the Frierdiker Rebbe put on the following things, and this is the connection to the Tachtonim. Aleph, v'sidur kitos v'shiurim kadayim lelimud halacha lemaise l'shem rabbanos. He organized classes and shiurim, etc., for the study of halacha lemaise, practical halacha. And these studies would lead people to be able to take on the seat of Rabbanos, to become Moreh Halacha, to teach Halacha. Al Menas Lahamid Moreh Hara B'Poel, in order to set up, but really it means to be able to establish a cohort of people that could be a Rabbanim, v'lishloyach Rabbanim l'kama mine kilos u'mishavim, and to send these Rabbanim to different cities, to different communities, etc. Beis, another thing that the Rebbe paid special attention to, b'hafatzas kiyum hamitzvos hamaisiyos being called hasugim shebe Yisrael. The Rebbe paid very special attention to the practical fulfillment of mitzvahs by all different types of Jews. Al yidei maise b'poel b'zeh, through making it possible and accessible. Shlicha shluchim lebniyas mikvos, so he sent shluchim to build mikvos. Shlichas mayalim b'chiyetz b'zeh, he sent people to be mayalim, to do circumcisions, etc. And thirdly, the third area of specific foci, be'inyan chinuch al taras hakodesh d'tinoka shel beis rabban. Frierdiker Rebbe put enormous effort in establishing schools that would teach the very young children al taras hakodesh in a purely holy way, and therefore Yisoid Chadarim, he established Chadarim, Shlichas Melamdim, he sent Melamdim to teach in these Chadarim, etc. V'chol inyanim elu he bechinas tachtoinim shebetorah u'mitzvos gufa. And these three things that we listed above, a person might say, this is just like the tachtoinim. The Frierdiker Rebbe, he should have deputized this work. Somebody less important could deal with setting up a cheder. How important is the education of young children, or somebody else should do the administrative work of setting up mikvahs and sending people to set up these mikvahs and dispatching mayalim to different places and so on and so forth. No, the Frierdiker Rebbe did this work b'tachtonim himself. Vav hasbara bazeh, to explain. B'limad haTorah matzinu kama ifanim. There are different ways in which you could learn Torah. Torah itself can be studied in different ways. Starting with how Torah is learned in the Mesivta that the Eibishter runs, in the Mesivta of the heavens. Until the way Torah is learned in this lower realm, in this world. And even in this world, there are different ways, there are different levels in which Torah can be learned, and amongst them. Limud ba'ofen de darash v'kibal schar. You can learn in a way where you engage in trying to expound in the Torah and you want to get a schar. Or you can learn in a way of Yagdil Torah v'yadir, to make the Torah more glorious. You're doing it because when you study Torah in a certain way and people become Talmidei Chachamim, this heightens the profile of the Torah, Kav Yachal. In other words, it brings glory and pride to the Torah. And then there's Limud La'asukei Shmaita Aliba de Hilchasa. And then there's learning for the purpose of being able to know exactly how you do mitzvahs, exactly what has to be done, to paskin halacha. And generally speaking, you can see two categories: elyonim, a higher, and a lower tachtonim. When a person learns with great enthusiasm for the purpose of bringing glory and greatness to the Torah, or at least it's not for the purpose of halacha l'maisa, harei hu mashkia esichlei b'nafshei beikar b'shakla b'tariya shebetorah. Then in the main, he invests himself in the shakla v'tariya, in the back and forth, in the different arguments, in the different opinions. So in the more abstruse, theoretic aspects of the Torah. Masha enkin, in contradistinction, when a person is learning for the purpose of being able to know exactly how you are supposed to comport yourself to be able to be a paisek, azai ikar asakaihu loy b'shakla v'tayu b'seichel shebetorah ela leida ha'heira mizeh b'maaseh b'koel. Then if you're learning from that vantage point, then most of your effort is going to go into understanding the practicalities. And the same thing can be seen in how mitzvahs are fulfilled. So on top of the fact, in addition to the fact that mitzvahs is already more tachtonim than Torah, because it's done with physical things in a physical world by a physical person, but even in mitzvahs, there's a category of mitzvahs that's more in the category of Torah, that's more connected to Elyonim. Like we have this idea that by learning about the karbanis, it's like you brought the karban. The Rebbe always underscored that in the 3 weeks we should learn the Rambam of all the details of the Beis Hamikdash, and that's like building the Beis Hamikdash v'chulei. Hainu shematzinu b'kamen yanim shebemakam she'efshar l'kayim hamitzvah b'maaseh b'poel. We have found in a number of places, a number of instances, that when it's impossible to actually fulfill the mitzvah practically, aza yesh la'asay b'torah the mitzvah zu. Then what we need to do is engage in the Torah about this mitzvah. Ela she'af al pikein al inin zeh nemarak ki'ilu hikriv. But even though you engage in the Torah about these karbanos, it's still only as if you brought the karban. Then you also have a more elyonim aspect of mitzvahs that would be the kavanah, the intention that's in the mitzvah. But in contradistinction, when the Beis Hamikdash was in existence, so you have a Jew. The Jew comes to the Beis Hamikdash. The Jew has a chiyuv, has an obligation to bring a korban. This Jew is not well versed in all the halachas. He relies on the kohen to bring his korban. And he relies on the Levi biduchanai, and he relies on the Levi to sing the appropriate, to make the appropriate music that accompanies this korban. V'Yisrael b'ma'amadai, and the Jew stands there. Harei hu mekayim es hamitzvah v'eschiyuv hakravas hakabanish alav. And so, irrespective of the fact that he doesn't really have the intellectual basis for all these things that are being done, but he is mekayim the mitzvah. He fulfilled his obligation. Ubefrati is yoser, and in more detail, inyan kiyam hamitzvahs b'maisu b'chinas tachtoinim. The practical fulfillment of mitzvahs is the tachtoinim modality. Legabe inyan hadibur sheba mitzvahs. When you compare it to the dibur, to talking about the mitzvah, to learning about the mitzvah, the kavanas of the mitzvah, the yeser al kain, legabe kavanas hamitzvahs b'machshava b'leiv, and how much more so over the kavana in the heart and the mind. And we understand that the same is true regarding those whom we have to teach Torah. Halimud l'tinoika shel beis rabban, ubefrat b'hascholas halimud, teaching young children, and especially the very beginning of what you teach them, limud aleph beis chulei, teaching them the aleph beis. Harei ze inyan shel tachtoinim bein sugi hatalmidim sheyesh lelamdam. This is the tachtoinim level amongst all the levels and all the demographics and all the cohorts of students that have to be taught. And let's not forget that the Rebbe taught us that it's dafke in tachtoinim that atzmos can be accessed. So you could say that the more evolved something is, evolution is really, Chassidus teaches us, devolution. You're really going further away from atzmos. The more sophisticated, the higher you're going. The more elyenim, the more you're removing yourself from the atzmos of the tachtonim, from the essence. So the more pashut, the more simple, the more you're on the atzmos, Zion. Valpizem move on, and based on this is understood. Shahes askus begimel bechinus tachtonim hamuris, that engaging in these three aspects of tachtonim that the Rebbe delineated, nas is dafka. This is done specifically kasher avodas ha'adam hi ba'ofen kazeh, when the avodah is in such a way when the person is not looking for any benefit for themselves, they're not looking to make themselves more complete. It's only for the sake of fulfilling Hashem's will. When a person feels herself as a separate existence in any gradation, azai ikar asokai b'chayusai hu b'vchinas elyonim shebetayra, then he is automatically and inexorably going to be drawn and put his efforts and enthusiasm in the more elyonim aspects, the ones that are more glamorous. The inyan haseichel sheba, they're going to be drawn to the parts that are more intellectual. They're going to be drawn to the godly light that radiates there. And therefore, so this kind of person will be ready to teach others, but which others? People that are kalim, they're vessels that can learn on this level. Both in the exoteric, in the nigla, and how much more so in the esoteric, in Chassidus and Kabbalah. Because through engaging in these more elyonim type of overtures, it's more obvious and more recognized how Elokus is being revealed and is being spread in the world. Masha Enkain, in contradistinction, Belimud Lasuki Shmaita Libud Hilchasa, when you learn, the less glorious details of halachas. V'chein belimud aleph beis im tinoike shabbeis rabban. And when you're teaching aleph beis to very young children, hine bazeh ein leitam v'chayas. This kind of person is not going to have much of a appetite to engage in that kind of less glorious work. V'loi bazeh maitzehu es oisher shebe'inyan ve'es gilui shemoy yizbarach. This kind of person is not going to see the wealth, the richness in that kind of overture and the way in which Hashem's name is revealed. And the same thing is true in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. This kind of person, his main enthusiasm is going to be in learning and in being able to hold space in his mind for the kavanah of the mitzvahs. Va'ad lekavana ledavka bo yisbarach, until the highest kavanah of cleaving onto Hashem. His main enthusiasm and pleasure is not going to be so much in taking the daled minim. It's going to be in all of the kavanas that are there, that are to be found in fulfilling this mitzvah. So it's specifically when a Jew can come to this level where the avodah is only for Hashem, lo yisbarach, kedei shetushlam kavanas shel baruch hu, only for the purpose that Hashem's intention should be fulfilled. And this person doesn't have a personal existence. Then this kind of person can do their avodah in the emes tachtonim. Because it's only and precisely through this type of work where the person basically takes themselves out of the equation. It's only about Hashem. And then it's atzmos. Then it's tachtonim. Okay, ches. Now the Rebbe says, "Bizmanenu zeh yesh lefarish kol inin ba'isius pshutais." In this time, okay, so this is years ago already, so I'm sure it applies much more today. The Rebbe says, I have to make everything really, really clear. I have to articulate things very clearly. And the Rebbe says, among many lessons that can be gleaned from everything we've said so far, there are two specific areas that have been weakened in our time that must be strengthened and bolstered. Ha'inin harishan hu, the first of these is limud halacha l'maisa, learning halacha, pashit, learning halacha. Royim anu asher be'ezus Hashem yisbarach haylech misrabe limud haTorah b'chlalos hein b'kamas v'hein be'echas. The Rebbe says we see that with the help of Hashem, thank God, generally speaking, Torah learning is increasing both qualitatively and quantitatively. Aval limud ba'ofen shel asukei shmaita liba dehilchasa, hainu limud hamayimid rabbanim shebeyacholtam lifsek b'she'elis b'chol dalet chelkei shulchan aruch. But when it comes to teaching and training rabbanim, learning practical halacha for the purpose of establishing rabbanim that will be able to give piskei halacha in all four parts of the Shulchan Aruch, ubefrat b'chelek Orach Chayim, and specifically in the part Orach Chayim, which deals with the most practical questions of everyday life of every Jew. The Rebbe says we see haylech u'poiches Rahman al-Islan midor lidor u'mishana l'shana u'michedesh l'chedesh. We see that there are less people engaging themselves in this effort every year, every month, every generation, every year, every month. This has kind of fallen out of fashion. Now he says, If you're talking about the paucity of knowledge in the area of Choshen Mishpat, which deals with legalities concerning businesses and things like that, Yesh L'Kavois, we can only hope Shemitzad Matzav HaMedina B'Hanagasa, that because of the country we live in and the way in which the government is set up, so there won't be terrible things that result from the fact that there aren't a lot of people who are conversant with all the halachas of Choshen Mishpat because of the legal system that we live in. But when it comes to the other three aspects of Shulchan Aruch, Even Ezer deals with marriage and divorce, amongst other things. Yeridea deals with basar v'chalav, kashrus, and nida, etc., etc. Abalachas kama v'kama, and how much more so when we talk about archayim, shehein halachas hanoigais bepoyel mamish. You're talking about halachas that apply very practically, the light rak bismanim misiyamim, and not just at certain times. Kim bechaye hayoyim yoyim kishmoi archayim. But it applies in the everyday life, as alluded to in the name, archayim, the way of life. The Rebbe says there's almost no rabbanim around to answer shaylas. When we come to a person who has devoted, he devotes all of his time to learning Torah, and you ask him a shayla halacha, meishivhu, he answers, Hineni asuk b'liman haTorah ba'ofen diyagdil Torah v'yader v'haylech u'moisif v'or. I'm engaged in learning Torah for the purpose of bringing greater glory and greatness to Torah, and I'm doing so in a way constantly increasing. Aval meloi lifsoik din b'halachis birchas hanenin, but he doesn't have any connection to giving a psak when it comes to brachos that you have to say, b'halachas tefillah, or in halachas surrounding davening, or b'hilchas kriya shema, b'shah shalachas elu lo lamad. He says, I can't paskin on halachas about kriya shema, or tefillah, or birchas hanenin. I didn't learn these halachas. U'b'negei la'archayim hachisaron hu b'shtayim. The Rebbe says when you talk about archayim, there's a doubled problem. On top of the fact, in addition to the fact that Pashid were missing rabbanim to give psak in these halachas, yeshna b'kach gam sakana shekol echad yeh lepoisek la'atzmai. You create a situation where everybody just has to be their own paisek, because if there aren't rabbanim, there aren't enough rabbanim to go to, everybody just has to do it themselves. Yehudi balabayis soicher she'inenu rav. So you have a Jew, he's a balabas. Let's say he's a businessman. He's not a rav. Bevadai imrak yerushamayim hu lo yite lachshav shebicholta lifsak levadai b'she'ela behilchas gitin b'afilu lo b'she'elas b'yeridea. So certainly, if he's a Yerushalayim, he's going to know that he can't be his own paisek when it comes to Even Ezer, to Hilchas Gittin, divorce. And not even in Yeridea, not even in questions of Basar v'Chalav and Nida. The kasher misaireres etzlo she'ela yichapes rav u'mareh hara b'payel. So when a question comes up in one of these areas, he's going to put forth effort to find a rav to get a psak. Masha ein came ba'archayim. But in contradistinction, when you're talking about archayim, when you're talking about the halachas of day to day, olul hu litais ba'atzmai, he might erroneously believe shebiyacholtoi leha'asais paisek ba'atzmai, that he could be his own paisek. Yabit b'kitzer Shulchan Aruch. He'll look in the Shulchan Aruch, the kitzer, b'lashon hakodesh, either in the Hebrew, v'im ein hu mevin lashon hakodesh, ba'anglit, b'tzarfatit, kedema. And if he doesn't understand Hebrew, she doesn't understand Hebrew, look in English, look in the French editions of the Shulchan Aruch, and he'll behave himself in accordance with what he can see with his own eyes in the Shulchan Aruch. The kivan shafilu b'negei l'shulchan aruch da Beis Yosef ha'isa shakla v'taya b'chulei ha'ech nitan lifsak mimena halacha mebli leida ha'mekoriz v'atayim. And the Rebbe says that because when it came to the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef even, not the Kitzur, but the actual Shulchan Aruch, there was a big shakla v'taya, there was a big argument, big back and forth about if you could actually come to psak halacha without looking at all of the sources and all of the reasons. So going back to the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Rishonim and going through everything, Harei muvenes hateitzah halula lavoy memsiras hater biyadei shekol echad ve'echad sheyifsok ba'atzmai din mitar kitzur shulchan aruch. So how much more so we can understand what terrible things can come from basically allowing every person to find a psak for themselves from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And so this really needs to be taken to heart. We're talking about the Bala Yelula, we're talking about what he wanted, we're talking about his avodah and what he was very much focused on. So this is something that Hachayit and Alibai we have to take to our heart. Me'avidasa shel Bala Yelula from the Bala Yelula's avodah. Shemasar nafshay gam b'shah shehadvarim hayu kruchim b'sakanas nefashos mamash. That in a time when his overtures involved sakanas nefashos, literally he could die for this. He was Moshe Nefesh kedei liyased moistes hanikroim b'yameinu batei medrash l'Rabbanim. One of the things he had Mesiras Nefesh for was to set up academies of study for Rabbanim. And from this, we learned the Haira, Shekol Elu Haru'uyim Lazeh, that all people that are capable of this, and even if they have a doubt that they might be capable, in this present time, the Rebbe says, when we have such a dearth of Rabbanim, so we're going to go l'chumra. We're going to say, you also have to do this, even if you doubt your capabilities. They should learn in a way that can lead to paskning halacha. V'schus harabim misayaitam u'b'myuchad kasher ein hadavar nagei rak l'rabim di'er echas, and the schus of all the many that will be impacted and benefit from this will help them, and especially because we're not just talking about a many in one city. Ella al piamatza behave lemeas kihilas ba'artzas habris umedinas acheres. But right now in this present time, we're talking about hundreds of communities, both in America and abroad, sheneisru leloi rabbanim meira hara b'shulchan aruch, that have been bereft of rabbanim who can teach shulchan aruch kipshutei. V'al zemeas meshavim be'eretz hakodesh, and similarly, there are hundreds of communities in Israel, and Israel is Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Elokecha Ba Meretz Hashana V'ad Achros Hashana. This is the land that Hashem says the eyes of Hashem are upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. She'ein Mishamshim Behem Rabbanim. These communities are not serviced by Rabbanim. Shetehei biyadam hasiyata d'shmaya hadrusha kedei lechaben lahalacha. You need Rabbanim because only Rabbanim have the siyata d'shmaya. They have the help from above that is necessary to come to the right psak, v'liyos dan din emes lamitai, and to hand down the proper psak. Asher ali dezeh nasim shutav lakadosh baruch hu b'maisa bereshis. The Gemara says that when Rabbanim hand down proper psak, they become partners with Hashem in maisa bereshis. So this was one thing that the Rebbe said has to be practically worked on when we take to heart the Friedrich Rebbe's avodah test. The second point, Hanakuda Hashenis Hanagaz b'myuchad l'tukufasenu hi. The second point that is especially relevant to our time, Oifen hachinuch d'tinoike shel beis Rabban. This concerns the education of our young children. Mitzad chuki hamadina de medina zu v'hadai masla. from the perspective of the laws of our country and other Western countries, nishabe matzav mavhil, we now find ourselves in a terrible situation. Seder hachinuch nikva kach, Jewish education has been established in such a way she'i efshar sheyavor yoyim mimei shnas halimudim ala yeled loy rak ben chamish lemikra el afilu b'shanim de ben eser lemishna ben yud gimel lemitzvos ben chamish eser legemara mibli sheyilmad limudei chol. Rebbe says that because of the laws, it's become impossible that there should be any day that children, not just the very young children, but even the Ben Eser LeMishnah, the 10-year-old, and even the Yud Gimel LeMitzvahs, the Bar Mitzvah, and even the Ben Chamesh Esrei LeGemara, and even the 15-year-old, all of these demographics, all of these cohorts are forced by law to learn Limudei Chol, to learn secular subjects. And in this too, we have to take a lesson from the Frierdiker Rebbe, Asher Masar Nafshay B'Poel. He literally sacrificed his life, and he sent others to sacrifice their lives. Al Minas Lahakim Talmudei Torah LeYaldei Yisrael, for the purpose of setting up Talmud Torahs for Jewish children. Al Taharas HaKodesh, in the most pure, holy way. Mibli Lishanes Chas V'Sholem is Darkei HaChinuch Hanahugais B'Yisrael B'Meshach Kol HaDayros, in order not to change the chinuch that was the norm amongst Jews in all the generations. The im came, and therefore, halachas kama v'kama b'yameinu ela, how much more so this is necessary for us in these times. Omedina zuki, and especially in this country, kasher ein b'davar matzav shel sakanas beguf chas v'shalom, where it's not a situation where anybody has to sacrifice, God forbid, endanger their life. That for sure we have to try with all of our strength. That the education of Jewish children should be in this very pure and holy level, without mixing in secular studies. Except for in circumstances where the law does not allow for this. V'gam us, and even then, rak b'mida hamichuyeves, and then only in the increment that is absolutely necessary. Yud v'afilu elu she'enam yicholim la'amay b'nisayon zeh, and even for those who cannot withstand this nisayon, this test. Hari la'amita shel davar hinei b'kamo kama fanim nitan l'tzeis yedei chayvas in yazeh gam b'frat sheb'frat u'behekef hachikata. So even those that can't see giving their children chinuch al taras hakodesh, they too should fulfill whatever they think they need to give their children in terms of secular education. It should be only on the level that is absolutely necessary. Ein hechrach klal shelimudei hakol yiskaimu bekamos ubeechas hanuhugos ata bevote hasefer shetehei hanholas anoshim oinashim yerushalayim shetachas. Hanholas anoshim oinashim yerushalayim. It's not necessary that the amount of limudei chol that is now given, both qualitatively and quantitatively, that is now being given in schools that are under the stewardship of people who have Yerushalayim. Kol shetzarich, the only thing that's necessary, hu la'eram, la'edadam, you just have to arouse them, and you have to encourage these people who are running the schools. Asher hishtadlusam ena tzricha liyos kol kach b'diuk b'kiyum chukei hamedina. You should basically bring it to their attention. You should encourage them that their overtures in terms of the secular studies does not have to be in exact conformity with the laws, ela b'kiyum hamitzvos v'chukim lahavdil, but rather the stress should be on the studies being done in a way that conforms with keeping mitzvahs of the Eibishter. She'aleim kol echad miYisrael mushba v'omed mehar Sinai. This is something that every Jew is sworn to and stands under Har Sinai. B'terem hayu chukei Medina. Our responsibility, our loyalty, we were sworn to the mitzvahs of Hashem before there were any other governments. Now the Rebbe says, Hein emesh adina d'malchus adina. It's true that we have this law. The Gemara teaches that the law of the land, we have to conform to the law of the land. So on top of the fact that when it comes, this is only when it talks to the laws of the land that do not contravene halacha. On top of the fact that when it comes to Nyanei Yadus, when it comes to halacha, ein lanu, we Bnei Yisrael, mi sheyich b'data elena, we don't have anybody that's going to force their opinion on us. Harei afilu b'negei lemi she'ena mesugal lame b'nisayin delimud limudei kodesh b'vad. But even for those who can't, for whatever reason, they cannot stand by this nisayon of only giving their children limudei kodesh. Harei yesh lishtadel, they should try b'misgeret hamisafsheret mitzad chukei hamedina, to try within the possible rubric of the laws of the land, sheroiv zmanam shel hatalmidim v'hatalmidos v'alachas kama v'kama roiv tzumas halev, that most of the time of the students, and interestingly, the Rebbe says the girls and the boys and the girls, and especially most of the attention, yufna lilimudei kodesh, should be turned to limudei kodesh. V'rak hamida hamuchrachas l'chol hadeis tukdash limudei chol. And only to the extent that is absolutely necessary, according to all opinions, only to that extent should attention be given to limudei chol. V'zois b'nois l'kach shel limudei chol lo yiskaymu b'boker b'tchilas halimud reishus arisasechem. And this is in addition to the fact that the secular studies should never take place in the morning. Should never be, like the Torah says, that the first of your crop should be given to Hashem. And this, the fact that the Torah studies has to come in the morning, that's not against any law. Because when you give Hashem the first, then you are raised by this. The Roimim es hayeled el HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you raise up, you elevate the child to Hashem, al yedei limud Torah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through the child learning the Torah of Hashem, v'rak la'achrei zeh, and only after that, in the afternoon, kasher hayeled kfar ayef, when the child is already tired, ve'ein breira, and there's no choice, yinasei meshach zman mitzumtzum b'yoser lelimudei chol. Then the smallest possible increment should be given for this purpose. And because we have an axiom that Hashem doesn't ask of us only what we can do, but we have the koyach to do. So for sure, even through just a little bit of effort, and with the proper attention, so very quickly, this will be able to be taken care of, that there should be a mitigation in the amount of time that Jewish children are learning secular studies. And a much larger amount of time, and again, both qualitatively and quantitatively, should be given to limudei kodesh. Hakara v'hargasha sher inyan zeh udavar hamuchrach, and this all has to be undertaken from a position of feeling and recognizing that this is absolutely imperative. Kivan shekain hu psak hadin b'hilchos Talmud Torah, because this is in conformity with the psak din of the halachas regarding Talmud Torah. V'azay bar hadavar shahachlata tavi l'dei poel. And when you emerge from this point of departure, that you know that it's absolutely necessary and that this is a halacha, then for sure it will come to fruition. וכשם שראינו בהנהגת בעל ההילולה, שמבלי הבט על כך שבימיו לא נראה כל סיכוי בדרך הטבע, שהשתדלוסי בענייני חינוך על תארץ הקודש במדינה ההיא תישא פרי. And just like we saw in the hanhaga, in the behavior of the Baal HaYelula, that irrespective of the fact that it seemed that in his time, in the days that he lived, in the country that he lived, there was no chance that his efforts for chinuch al taras hakodesh should bear fruit. Nirim ata peres hishtadlazu be'eni basar. But now we can see the fruit of his labor, and we can see it obviously. Kasher yotzim l'rachayiv ha'ir. Sometimes you go out to the streets of the city, you meet people. Ba'arim hagdolos ba'artas habris, you meet these people in big cities in America, or in any other place. And you meet the children and the descendants of people, Jews, who were in Russia in that time of the Frierdiker Rebbe, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. And you see that this young person comports himself in accordance with Torah mitzvahs, and you wonder, how could it be? How did this family, how did these people, how are they successful in holding on to their Judaism? But after you speak to them a little bit, and you investigate a little, it becomes clear she'aviv madriche, that his father, who was his teacher, or his savav, or his grandfathers, amdu bekesher or b'maga umasa echad mishluchim bal hayilula. It becomes clear that his father, his grandfathers, were in touch, were in contact. They were engaged with the shluchim of the Bal HaYelula, asher oiru linyane yadus, and they aroused Jews in all inyanim of Judaism, v'lamar imoy, and these shluchim of the Frierdiker Rebbe learned with these fathers and grandfathers, v'histater b'yachad imoy, and they hid themselves together, ba'aliyas hagag, in attics, oy b'martef, or in a basement, kedei lilmoid b'chulo, in order to learn Torah. V'lachein nishar hala b'yahadusay, and that's why this Jew that you meet in Chicago or in California remained Jewish, because his father, his grandfather, was in contact with one of the Frierdiker Rebbe shluchim. And so the same thing is true for all of those who go in the ways of the Frierdiker Rebbe forever. Through our putting our effort into these avodas, strengthening the purest and the holiest type of chinuch. For sure, we will successfully be able to raise the troops of Hashem, the army of Hashem, who will very, very soon leave this last galus in the true and complete geula alidei Mashiach tzidkenu uba'agala didan, through the agency of Mashiach, and it should be very soon, right now, mamash. So this is from a Sikha that the Rebbe said on Yud Shvat Tafshin Lamed Zayin. I think that's 1977. I think Sipa has an announcement before we do anything else, and it's already 11:30, so this Sikha has gone longer than most lately.
Thank you so much for the Sikha. It sounds like maybe it was written last week as a response to the New York Times. I wanted to just mention that a few ladies, especially Joni, have been planning a get-together for right after Chaf Beis Shevat. I think we were going to do Monday, February 13th. Am I right? And details are in the works. It's not completely figured out just yet, but thank you, Joni, for really the brainchild and spearheading it and making sure it all works. And it's nice that it's on the recording because everyone's invited, even people that tune into the recording that don't necessarily have the 10 a.m. slot free. It's not like a kinnis related thing in any way. It just happens to be right after the kinnis because that's a good time for many people. So please stay tuned. We will post in the chat, and we're figuring out the details, exactly where and stuff like that.
Thank you, Tzippa. I want to just say one more time that we studied the Sikha, and all of those who will study the Sikha this week and afterwards, for the Refuah Shlema of Baruch Shalom Doiver ben Miriam Bluma. You should have a Refuah Shlema Nisi, and immediately for Shlema for Henya Rivka Bas Bracha Devar Aleya, for Shlema for Harav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya, and all of us should have a good Chodesh. It's a very, very special Chodesh, and we should only be able to share P'sur Teves and Samches, always, always. So anybody that wants to share something? Okay, we got our work cut out for us. Kol Tov, Hatzlacha, everybody.
Thank you so much, Rivky.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tzippa. Kol Tov.